Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Future Work World, CPL's podcast for the now and next of work. I'm Barry Winkless, head of the Future of Work Institute, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Aidan Kenny, president of Metrology Europe in Nikon. Welcome to the show, Aidan. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Barry. Great to see you. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Brilliant. Aidan, I'm going to start with the question I ask all the guests who come onto the show.
Yeah.
How did you go from there to here? How did you end up in Nikon as the president in European context?
Yeah. Well, thanks. It's been quite a journey, quite a ride. I mean, I think in my early days, I started working in the semiconductor industry with analog devices down in Limerick, and then joined Nikon originally back in the early 90s in the semiconductor division. And it's really impressive to me. First of all, the Nikon brand is incredible. You know, the history of engineering and everything there makes it a very attractive and well-known brand. And the quality of engineering there. So I joined them in their semiconductor industry and spent nearly 20 years working there.
Oh.
And during that time, I got to meet many people. I got to, visit a lot of the factories in Japan and places like that. Got to see, some incredible customers and applications of the engineering. So I was always intrigued by it. I left then to go and explore and do some other things. Worked in innovation primarily for a number of years. And then the opportunity arose to return there recently to back into Nikon Metrology Europe. And what was fascinating about it was, first of all, as I said, I knew Nikon very well, and I always loved working for them, and so it was a great opportunity. Secondly, I think there was the opportunity that I saw, the part of the business I'm in now, metrology business, and with Nikon Metrology Europe and Nikon X-Tech, so they're two of the businesses that work in metrology, X-ray, microscopy, and other areas like that. Fascinating. When I look at industry now and what's happening with industry now, I just felt that it's at a moment, there's a change happening. There's so much innovation opportunity in that business. There's so much pressure on the industry to change that I really felt like it was a time to get, back involved. And the opportunity then to lead a part of Nikon's business for the Europe region was actually a huge, opportunity that I couldn't turn down really, that I thought it was so interesting to be able to work in that. And to connect with some colleagues in the past. I know the company, know the brand very well, and the evolution that's there of the products that are out there and the challenges the customer have really made it very appealing for me. Some strong people working there too, which is a big part of it.
Did it feel like coming home a bit?
It did. It felt, weirdly comfortable in a way.
We
many
cut
people.
that out of the interview.
Yeah. No, but it was there was that sense. It was it was while there's a lot of challenges and a lot of things to do and focus on at the same time, it was a very interesting opportunity.
I'm interested, we're moving into this industry 5.0, manufacturing 5.0 world, this perfect blend of sustainability, people and technology.
Yes.
I'm interested, obviously, in the metrology side of that. So, you guys are obviously leaders in this space. From a Nikon perspective, how do you see the market in Europe? So a lot of lighthouse sites now developing in Europe, and obviously metrology has a role to play in that. So, what does the market feel like for Nikon at the moment, specifically around that kind of manufacturing 5.0 world?
Yeah, I think. We see, if I look at it, so as I said, when I rejoined last year, I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time looking at the market, looking at our customers, meeting and talking to our customers, which was a fascinating way for me to really get immersed in the business. And I saw kind of a wide spectrum, really, of manufacturing out there. I saw some of the, metrology began or belonged in the lab for a long time, so traditionally, a lot of the customers using this type of technology would have been smaller labs or research centers or places like that. But now, as we've moved to higher volume manufacturing, the future of manufacturing with automation, with, all of the different enhancements that are coming, and also the pressures and challenges on cost and sustainability and everything like that. What it really does is it creates this, I'd say, a demand now for those type of metrology applications to move into the factory. And there's an amazing opportunity in that, if we think about, X-ray, CT systems or something like that around non-destructive testing, the application that can have in a factory. We think about the automation that's involved and how we can help automate measurement and metrology within those factories as well. There's a huge contribution that it can make to this future of manufacturing as we see it. And frankly, it feels like it's still beginning. It still feels like it's at the start of something. It hasn't been cracked yet, I think. But as I look ahead, I see a lot of opportunity and challenges to overcome. But that's that's kind of what's interesting, and that's why when we're engineers, there's the engineers love having problems to solve and challenges to go after, and so that's what makes it so interesting for people to work there.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you talk about something like metrology, obviously it's evolved significantly over the last few years. I had a look through the old Nikon, sophisticated technologies that you guys are bringing out. I suppose what really jumped out at me was metrology surely offers an opportunity for manufacturing organizations to get some quick wins.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's one of those things where, you put some of this technology in place, you're going to get amazing, data straight away almost. Right?
Yes.
And to me, it's an example of manufacturing 5.0 in action.
Yeah.
So are you kind of seeing some of that in the market in terms of people going, well, actually, do you know what? This is something we could hang our hat on a little bit in advance of all of the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That might be a little bit more difficult to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a couple of thoughts on that, really. I think one is that, if you think about traditional quality, it was almost at the end of line, right?
Yeah.
At the end of line, and you discovered a problem, and your win there was in containing the problem within your factory, right? Now, as we look at metrology within the factory, what we're looking for is to monitor carefully the performance of your factory. And it's like, someone said to me, it's a little bit like the nervous system of the factory. Okay, so it's watching the whole time. It's measuring. You've got data, huge amounts of data coming out. You're not just looking at yes, no, or you're go, no go. You're looking at trends. You're looking at signals. You're looking for small, tiny factors that can influence how you're doing. You can feed that back into the process so that you can rectify things as it's happening. And I think that application of it, into the factory is really where it's most powerful. And there's very tangible benefits for that. I think one is, if you're thinking about let's say you're building a new car production line or something like that. Well, then there's a natural gap between when you construct the line and when the quality level reaches what you need, to qualify the factory, for example. Well, with inline metrology and with the application of metrology in those types of environments, you can really speed that up. And so the time to money, for example, is much quicker. And so that intelligence that you have, it just gives you more confidence in what you're doing, what you're manufacturing. It also allows you to be really mindful about the decisions you're making, about the investments, about where to focus, where your challenges are within your factory. And so from a future of manufacturing point of view, I think that's where metrology, it provides that data and those insights to allow you to really, really optimize the performance of that factory throughout the line and not just, maybe what would have been traditionally at the end of line or something like that.
It kind of leads on nicely to my next question. So, 10 years out.
Yeah.
What does metrology look like in these fantastic sites of the future? What does that whole thing look like?
Yeah, I think it's moving. I mean, as I said, I rejoined at the start of last year, and so I spent a lot of time talking to people, going to visit customer sites, talking to factories, and I was able to do it in a way where I could say to them, "Hey, how are you thinking about the future?" That was the question I was really interested in asking them, because I was trying to take a longer term view of it. And the themes were consistent. I think the themes were really about automation within the factory. And so how do we drive automation within the factory? How do we drive consistency and performance, And then also, how do we take a lot of the metrology, which even today still a lot of it is kind of side of line, if you like. It's not truly in line. And so the idea of having it in line, the idea of having a closed loop and feeding it back, the data feeding it back to the process to optimize it and things like that. That's really, I think, where the strong opportunity is. And then if you layer on some of the other technologies that are emerging, like even in our business, using in X-ray CT systems, using AI reconstruction software to speed it up. So, again, if you think about traditionally in a lab base, the speed wasn't that important. As soon as you go into, supporting high volume manufacturing, speed, quantity, automation, accuracy, data availability, all of that is critically important. And that's where, the software actually can introduce a lot of efficiency and a lot of performance enhancements. And, you asked me at the beginning why I liked, why I wanted to join Nikon. I mean, one of the things for me that I really like is that, in the UK, we manufacture our own X-ray sources for our CT systems. In Leuven in Belgium, we have our global software team that do the software development for that system. And so we actually have a really nice ownership of the entire product kind of portfolio there for X-ray CT in particular. And then, if I look at some of the other products we have, there's they're very, very focused on innovation and driving forward and looking ahead. So how can we make this technology more affordable? How can we make it more capable? Is really the goal and the path that we're on with all of the product ranges that we have.
It just links nicely, I suppose, into, obviously it's very much an integrated product set that you deliver now, right? So it's hardware, it's software, it's everything in between. Role of AI, I hate to bring it up, but basically nobody will watch this blog if we don't talk about it, right? And I know you guys are starting to integrate, those types of technologies, particularly into your newer, your newer tech stack. So interested, what's your view on AI? How it's going to disrupt metrology? How are you guys currently using it, or will use it maybe into the future?
Yeah. I think that it can't be ignored, right? It can't be ignored. And then when you're talking about data and large data sets, which is what we deal with really, then we really look to leverage the power of that, and that can be done in a number of different ways, both from an analysis point of view, but even learning from, if you already have a huge data set, like we're effectively in the data business. We have systems that perform some form of inspection or measurement, for example. It generates data, therefore we have a lot of data. And so we're very, heavily thinking about the application of AI in that environment. I mean, one of the big challenges for a lot of companies from an AI perspective is data. And so in our case, the tools generate that data. So it's really about how do we utilize that data for the benefit of the customer. Obviously, it's our customers' data, so we got to be very careful, and there's a lot of safeguards about that. But at the same time, it's really thinking about how do we really get the maximum value out of that data. And in some cases it can be, new levels of analysis. In other cases it can be simply how can we use the data to speed up how quickly we can determine the outcome of a certain inspection step or something like that as well. So we are looking very, very closely at that across the range and across the spectrum. We have to do it cautiously, mindful of the data that we're looking at and dealing with, and the sensitivity of some of our customer bases, the types of industries that they're in. So we got to be very careful about that, and we do that, with a lot of caution, but also really with an innovative mindset as we're looking forward.
I think it's really interesting that some of the work we're doing in the Future Work Institute as well, just, we're hearing about data, right? And we're hearing about these new types of sophisticated technologies in a manufacturing environment. Fundamentally changes the role of operators, really. Right? Because all of a sudden, operators need to be maybe 10 times more data savvy. They're going to have to deal with probabilistic reasoning. If this is showing me this, it's likely it's that. Are you seeing anything in at the moment in terms of, some of your implementations, how it's changed or changing the role of people actually on the lines?
Yeah, I think it's not just AI. I think it's the more and more automation, is changing the types of roles that we would have seen on the factory floor. So we see with automation, we see the nature of work on the factory floor is changing. And then within metrology, and for the specialists who work in that area, it is very much now about data engineering, and data. There are skill sets. I mean, a lot of people who purchase the type of equipment that we have are interested in pushing it to its limits, and so. And what's interesting about some of these, X-ray in particular, for example, is you're talking like the limits are, it's defined by physics in a way, right? And so, so really thinking about, what I'm seeing certainly is the skill levels among our customers are really rapidly evolving and growing, And I think what's critically important, and I really love, is how our teams work with them in order to really understand their most difficult problems. And so that's creating, I would describe it as much more interesting work. That's kind of the work we all want to be doing. And so definitely there's more data engineering. But at the same time, I think there's tools there that can assist and support that. We have we have the tools to help interpret the data to a great degree as well. And so leveraging those tools so that I would call it like the speed to insight is very, very important. But it is changing the role of the people on the factory floor, and it's also changing the role of the production engineers and the quality engineers and the other who are sitting maybe not on the floor all day every day, but are responsible for making sure that the factory is running as efficiently as possible. So new roles, I think, and I think it'll continue to evolve. Frankly, I think we'll continue to see more automation. We'll continue to see bigger data sets and more data that's available, and we'll continue to see smarter computing power that can tell us more from that data. And so a little bit of it is about kind of tuning that ecosystem, so that we're really ensuring that we're optimizing the factory as it's running, and really learning from that information and that data.
Yeah, I'm interested in all this stuff. Sounds really cool, right?
Yeah.
It's really at the start of this new quality revolution, right? And I know we've had waves of the importance of quality, Six Sigma, Lean, and all very much, I'm going to say, methodological related stuff. This to me seems like a fundamental shift where we're moving away from quality as a thing we have to do to quality as actually something that's a real strategic enabler. So I'm interested in Nikon, you're part of that world now.
Yes.
How is all this stuff ultimately going to drive, improvement, efficiencies, decreasing defects, because ultimately that's what we're talking about here, right? So, across whatever sector. I know some sectors are more compliant than others, but there's still this big drive to, how do we make quality this integrated, strategic, wave that will really make a huge difference to her? Are we kind of at the start of that now? Are we moved more forward than that? Because where are we in, do you think, in that?
I think, I get the sense that it's not, we're breaking the silo a little bit between quality and production and things like that, maybe, and how it would have been thought about traditionally. It's really just more about optimizing the factory and how it's run, how it's working. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. For example, with more inline and more real-time metrology, and with the opportunity to feed that back into the production systems and things like that, like even alone from a sustainability point of view or something like that, right? What we're able to do there is at least reduce rework or reduce scrap in the factory floor. The closer we can bring the insight to the part of the process that's really driving a defect, for example. Or continue what's always been done, is watching for things in control or going out of control or things like that. But what we can do now and what we can measure now is far greater than it was in the past. So I really think we are at a point where it feeds in, like, this metrology. When I think about it, I guess I think about metrology, I think about inspection, I think about the full kind of ecosystem of quality. And I think having the tools now that can really embed that into the manufacturing process, it really allows us to, to optimize the process, reduce rework and scrap, which has, from a sustainability point of view, is better. And then I do think, looking ahead at the future of manufacturing industry, if we look at new techniques, like I know one example, like with additive manufacturing, for example, or other areas like that, where we're able to build things now that we weren't able to build in the past, for example, and then how do we inspect those, and how do we qualify those, and how do we, if you're building using additive manufacturing as an example to make a critical item, whether it's for, a medical device or for other application or something like that, how do you validate that and certify that, for example? And that's where these tools come in into that equation as well then. So they're, in that sense, they're kind of enablers of new technology, and so that's what's exciting about it too, is that it's not just a case of looking for an issue, it's really a case of enabling innovation and enabling new technologies.
Validating from the minute it's starting to be designed.
Exactly. And we, a small part of our business, as we do X-ray CT systems, for example, and we have centres in the UK, France, Germany, and Belgium where we have systems where customers can send us a part. So we do kind of, X-ray CT as a service, if you like. And what's interesting there is we're seeing a lot of customers sending us parts, number one, as part of their new product development. So they're creating a new product, and before it goes to manufacturing, they want to, send us a prototype maybe to check and to look in a way, and to inspect it in a way that they can't do in-house, if you like. Or secondly, if there's a problem in the production line somewhere, then we'll get sent a part, and we can scan it, provide the data next day, type of thing for those customers. And so and that can be a nice introduction for those customers into the capabilities that metrology can enable, if you can imagine. And that helps then slowly, it helps you build a business case as well, in your factory. If you try to say, how might I apply this, in my factory? then having those types of services available is a really interesting starting point. And it's one where we see a lot of our customers start, actually, is by engaging us on those types of services.
Yeah, I understand.
And then after a while, they see the value and it justifies the investment. And again, our goal is really to encourage and drive innovation within our customers, so that they can move more quickly with confidence, if you like. And that's critically important for us.
I want to take a slightly different track, and only a couple more questions, so don't worry. You've come back into Nikon.
Yeah.
You're ultimately leader of the president of the European division.
Yes.
Culture.
Yes.
So I know you're big on culture. So
yes.
Nikon has had a strong culture, is known for a strong culture. What are you trying to mold with the culture for the future for Nikon, so that it's a sustainable, innovative business? You mentioned innovation a lot. So behind the scenes there's a lot of culture that needs to work for that to work. So what are you trying to achieve there on the cultural side?
I think when I look at Nikon, I think it's a huge, first of all, as a company, there's a huge history there. I think it goes back to about 1917 or so, a strong engineering and innovation culture. And the philosophy within Nikon overall is around trustworthiness and creativity, if you like. They're the kind of the cornerstones of what Nikon does. For me, coming back into Europe, I've spent the first year back in really, as I said, talking to our customers, but more importantly, as well, talking to our employees around Europe. We've got teams spread all over Europe. So you've got this multicultural community of experts, if you like, right? But between the UK, France, Germany, Belgium, other areas like that as well. We've got Japanese heritage and Japanese, partners and stakeholders who work very closely with the US as well. So I think from a cultural point of view, we've got this this mixture of all these different business cultures and work cultures. But at the core of these foundational, I would say, engineering excellence is very important. I think the customer focus is critically important for us as well. And then really, I'm looking to tap into those. They exist and they're there. So it's really what I'm trying to do is unlock that in a coordinated way. Exactly. Exactly. How do we, I'm always interested in, and I use the word a lot around pace, how do we up the pace or accelerate the pace of what we're doing, and critically what we're trying to do is develop and work with our customers so that we solve their problems. And how do we do that at pace? How do we strengthen the trust that we have with our customers and they have with us? How are we, curious about how do we ask questions? Because, we know that this industry and the industry we support, and we support many, across automotive, aerospace, many industries we support. They're all, if you like, tackling their own problems and their own challenges. And so how do we make sure that we're curious about those problems, the customer problems? And that's the kind of culture that I'm looking for, is that inquisitive culture within the business that sits on top then of all of the amazing skills and talent that the people within the organization have, so that we can truly partner with our customers and to be an enabler for them more than anything else.
Last question, Aidan.
Yeah.
What are you excited about for Nikon and the next, let's say a 3-year horizon? We're working on the 3-year plans these days. So genuinely interested in what you're excited about. What you really kind of go, I'm excited about this.
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one is that I'm really excited for the European market, and because I believe that it's evolving so rapidly right now. In many sectors that we operate in, there's challenges for sure. There is no stability, if you like, in the market at the moment, right? So given that, but again, that's an environment where we're so happy to be in that environment where there's so much activity happening, and so
I was going to think that
it's dynamic.
But that uncertainty might have been an opportunity for some of the stuff that you guys do. No?
Well, it is exactly. It is, but it's from a business leader perspective, there's uncertainty. So where do I invest and what do I invest in, and things like that. So it makes decision making more challenging. So we have to work extra hard to make to help encourage our customers and work with them to make the right decisions. So I think that there's a really interesting playing field right now is one of the things I would say. I think secondly that we're we're lucky in Nikon in that it is an innovative company. And we have a lot of innovation happening. And so whether it's, hardware, we just launched a new laser radar product that's, it's kind of cheaper, faster, lighter than the prior one, if you like. And so we're really, we want to drive innovation and capabilities of the products that we're able to sell into the market. And so I think there's a lot of innovation happening like that is really market driven. It's really market driven. And so I'm excited about the introduction of those technologies into the market. And then as well, I guess finally it's around the people in that I'm really excited for understanding how do we leverage the absolute best of everybody in the organization. And that's one of the core principles and one of the core activities that I'm engaged in at the moment in driving that forward. So,
Aidan, good to see you again.
Lovely to see you. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thanks for a fascinating interview.
Best
of luck in the future.
Thank you so much. You too, Barry.
Thanks,
care.
Ed.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Aidan, on a fascinating conversation on all things manufacturing 5.0. That's the end of the show today. Please follow us on all good platforms. And a gentle reminder that my new book, Future Work World, is out now in all good bookstores and across all good sites. Thanks very much, guys. See you soon.